the series we are looking at the moment is the rhythm of life, and today we're going to look at something very interesting, something that, to be honest, I didn't think about before, and is: are we creatures of habits? Probably, let me give you some definition. Habit, according to the great dictionary or vocabulary, Google, says this: a habit is a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially one that is hard to give up. Now, probably you didn't think about the fact that we are creatures of habit, but science would largely agree that we are creatures of habit. The way we talk, if you are Italian, the way you gesticulate while you're talking as well, the way you move, and sometimes even the way you react to things is a result of your habit. And probably you may think as well, if we are created, then God really enjoys irony, because good habits are very hard to pick up and easy to give up, but bad habits are so easy to pick up and impossible to give up. So, there was a song recently sung by Ed Sheeran, which, by the way, I just realized a couple of weeks ago that he's born in West Yorkshire, so big up to West Yorkshire, that says, he speaks about his own bad habits. And so he lists many bad habits that he has. And then at the end, the chorus of this song is, my bad habits lead to you, to someone. I don't know if you thought about this, about the idea that habits can lead us somewhere. Either it's someone, in case it's Ed Sheeran song, or somewhere, probably is a better way of saying it. But really, what is that makes a habit good or bad? What is that? What is a bad habit and what is a good habit? And to be honest with you, I've struggled with this idea because I think habits are something very personal. Something that can be a good habit for me is not necessarily good for you. So what is a good or a bad habit? And we see that Paul, in the passage that we read, Paul is kind of moving in between these ideas of doing good and doing bad, knowing what is good and what is bad. And he says this in verse 19. And it's something that he repeats all the way through the passage. He says, for I do not do what I want to do, but evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. I wish I knew the Bible when I was a child and used this as an excuse to my parents when they were kind of rebuking me. Would have been good, but no. If you are new to the Bible, actually, and probably are thinking what's going on in this passage, it's good to give a little bit of context to this letter to the Romans. And so, the letter to the Romans is written to this church in Rome, and the church in Rome has two groups of people. One group of people is from a Jewish background, and the other group of people is from a polytheistic background. So those from a Jewish background, they will say they were keen in following certain tradition, in certain patterns, certain habits that were good for them. So they want to show how good it was to follow them. But on the other hand, those from a polytheistic background, they were not that bothered about it. And probably what the Jewish group will say is that they were giving themselves to the bad habits of that time. And so in the tension of these two groups, Paul is writing and he's bringing his own experience. And Paul himself comes from a Jewish background, although he knows a lot, and probably he knows very much about the polytheistic background too. And so he writes in this tension and bringing his own experience. And I want you to think about this now when we think about good and bad habit. We go to school. We learn about things. We learn about maths. We learn about history. We learn how to build skyscrapers, how to design skyscrapers. But no one, I think, I never met anyone like this, but no one on this earth has ever gone to a study course that is titled something, How to Do the Wrong Thing, or I will teach you how to rebel to your parents. No one has ever done that. I never come across anyone who did that, and I never come across someone who offered that to me. And yet, for some reason, there still is someone in the world that puts pineapple on pizza, which is ridiculous. What a rebellion, I will say. What a bad habit. No, leaving joke aside, I think the point of this is the idea that we, by nature, we are prone to follow bad habits without necessarily being taught how to. And so, the point that Paul is making in this stretch, speaking to these two groups of people, bearing in mind that he understands both of them, is this. Where do your habits lead to? Whether good or bad habits, where do they lead to? And where are they taking us, if you ever thought about this? What do these habits say about us? Because if we look again in this passage, in the opening verse 14 to 18, there is something incredible about the idea of a habit. And Paul says this. We know that the law is spiritual. We know that those traditions are spiritual. They are good. But I am unspiritual. I am not. Sold as a slave to sin. Again, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. I agree that those traditions are good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me. I know that I cannot do good. I know that I cannot follow those traditions. That is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I have to confess another thing today. After reading this passage a couple of times, I had such a sore head. It's so repetitive and it's so powerful. But what he says in this passage here is that habits have the power to show us or to tell other people about us. They have the power to lead us somewhere, even unconsciously. And I'm not staying here today to say what is a good habit and what is a bad habit. It's not my point. But many times in my daily life, I end up thinking I should use my time better. And among loads of things I have to work on myself, surely there is someone about finding a lasting hobby, something that I find pleasing to do. Don't get me wrong, I like doing loads of things. I like playing the piano, I like playing football. Probably those who play with me don't like it, but I like it. But sometimes I don't find fulfilling what I'm doing. And I think habits are also about this. They are also about feeling fulfilled and pleased when you do them, when you get into them. And for example, when I see other people finding pleasure in what they do, in their habits, in their hobbies, sometimes I feel a little bit like Paul is feeling here. And I guess that what comes out of this passage is the idea that Paul, when he compares himself to the good habits or to the good traditions, is himself as inadequate. So if on one hand, Paul is speaking to people who follow these traditions that are good, on the other hand, he speaks to people like us. I think that no one here can define himself perfect. Sometimes I think I'm perfect, I like to think that, but I'm not. And this is what he says. He says, I know that those good habits are good, but I'm not good at all. I cannot follow them. And so I think the beautiful thing about this passage is the idea that Paul doesn't leave that there, doesn't say, okay, these are good habits, I'm not good, so I'm not going to do anything about it. At the end of the passage, verses 24 and 25, there is the key of the passage, I would say. And he says this, what a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Who will rescue me from this body that is keen in doing the bad things? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I myself, in my mind, am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin. Basically, I like to think that when Paul is writing this, he's kind of thinking, so then, if I'm not good enough for these good habits, how can I escape, or Xscape, to be in theme? How can I escape this condition of continuously going back to the bad habits? How can we escape this inadequacy? And if you look at the Bible, if you have a little bit more experience in the Bible tells us in both Old Testament and New Testament about the story of a people who continuously go back to what is bad, although they know what is good, and they continuously go back to do what they are not supposed to do. And then on the New Testament we find the same thing, people that are not good enough. But the whole Bible, if we take Old Testament, New Testament, they lead all to the same point, which is Jesus. And in fact, in Jesus, we find a beautiful picture. And the picture is what I think the perfect representation of this is in one of Jesus' stories. When Jesus, talking to a group of people, of perfect people who define themselves perfect, he says there was a father who had two sons. One was perfect, or thought to be perfect, and the other one declared the father dead in order to take his own inheritance. And then he took his inheritance and went away to spend his own money, to spend all this money that he had from the father, that by now for him was dead. And then after some time he comes back to the father, and I don't know if you were in the father what you have done, but Jesus tells us a beautiful story, that this father is waiting for the son on the door. And as soon as he sees the son, he runs after him. He runs after him and he hugs him. And it's a beautiful picture but the problem is that you now have one son who thinks he's perfect and is mad at the father because he never had such a deep bond with the father, or the father had never searched for a deep bond with him. And then you have the other son who fell into bad habits, and he was hugged by the father. He was feeling loved by the father. And so when the perfect son complains to the father, in Luke 15, verse 31 and 32, the father says this to his son, to his perfect son. He says, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found." So the point of Jesus that he's making in this story is the idea that although we may follow bad habits, there is always a way to come back from them. Because I think the cross of Christ, when we see the work of Christ, we see the cross that tells us a story of reconciliation between a God who is perfect and humankind who is not. We saw all the way through here in this series that we are not always perfect. But the beautiful message of the Bible is that the cross of Christ does not consider our inadequacy. I hope I got this term right, inadequacy. But consider the love of God. And so Paul, at the end of the letter to the Romans, after he says, it's good to follow the law, it's good to follow it, but it's not necessary. He says something that Paul, earlier on, he already said. He used a verse that I want to use today, which is Romans 12. And he says this: "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is good, pleasing, and perfect will." So can you see how Paul is reshaping the standard of choosing what is a bad or a good habit? I think in Paul's mind there is this idea that we will never be able to achieve perfection. But he points people to something else. Like Paul was saying before here, he changes our standard, he changes the way we approach things. Because what we have to look at is not the habits themselves. It is in view of God's mercy. And I have to be reminded each day of this passage. Each day, when I want to follow my habits, I have to be reminded in view of God's mercy. Where do my habits lead me? Because when we look at, I think, when we have in sight God's mercy, then we also we can shape our habits, our identity around it. And probably Ed Sheeran songs, his bad habits would lead to someone. But the Bible tells us that our bad habits can lead to a God who wants to have a relationship with us, who wants to point us to something greater, and a purpose that will last forever.